I'm Jay Curley. I teach modern and contemporary art history at Wake Forest, and I'm honored to be a small part of this event, celebrating my friend and dear friend and mentor, David Lubin. I've taken to calling this event Lubin Palooza, because I feel like it sort of captures the celebratory feeling of this. But I'm here to introduce our next speaker, and I'm honored to do so, and introduce Alex Nemerov, the Carl and Marilyn Thoma Professorial Professor in the Arts and Humanities at Stanford University. It's quite a long title. He's one of the most influential voices in art history today, well known for his close attention to art objects and visual culture, as well as his wonderful poetic and elusive writing style. His remarkable productivity speaks to a mind of ceaseless curiosity. 11 books in 3 decades. Just think about that, 11 books in 3 decades, alongside a wealth of journal articles and catalog essays as well. His first book, based on his Yale PhD dissertation, was a revisionist history of Frederick Remington that appeared in 1995. Most recently, in 2023, he published The Forest, a fable of America in the 1830s, a work that ignores traditional boundaries, existing as much as literature as art history. Between these milestones, Alex has illuminated diverse subjects in his books: an American still life painter of the early 19th century, the visual culture of World War II, and the photographer Louis Hine. His study of Helen Frankenthaler from 2021, Fierce Poise, exemplifies his literary approach, examining the artist's development through 10 pivotal days in the decade of the 1950s. His rich descriptions of her stained paintings mirror their poetic brilliance. His rich descriptions of her stained paintings mirror their poetic brilliance in the very canvases they're described. In other words, his language itself is as poetic and incredible as Frankenthaler's works. On a personal note, I count myself among the fortunate students whose own art historical future was shaped by Alex. I arrived at Yale as someone largely dismissive of painting's subtle complexities. I was instead focused on the class and power structures underlying the art world. In 2 seminars, Alex literally taught me the act and craft of close looking and the craft of writing about these visual experiences, something that has infused all my work since then. So please join me in welcoming Alex Nemerov.
Thank you, Jay, for that very nice introduction, and it's really nice to be here. Obviously, you see a lot of familiar faces. What is not there is the topic that immediately came into my mind when I was invited to speak here, and I suppose it has to do with the following slide. This was the idea that came into my mind, basically, which is something like David Lubin. What if you had never been born? What would the world, of course, what would the world look like? But also, what would art history look like? And so this is the form that it took. For me, this is the first thing I thought of, was that something about the art that we study would not be there. So you will recognize, as it were, in absentia, Winslow Homer's veteran in a new field without the veteran. And so my premise, as I thought about this, was that without David, the figures in the art would not even be there. And you can follow the, if you like, more broadly self-serving line of thinking about the importance of the art historian that my view entails, namely that the art historian doesn't come after the work, but somehow precedes it. And without the art historian, there would be no work, not as we know it, which, as backwards sounding as that may imply, I don't know that that's wrong, actually. I think, like with Jennifer's pastel drawing, in a very real way, the art historian makes the work, brings it to significance, causes us to see it, and does so after the fact. Without the art historian, there would be no work, not as we know it. But then I began to think that actually this was not really the focus my idea was calling me to. It was something else, a little more somber, if you like, but also finally, I hope, quite affirmative and of interest to us all here today as we celebrate David's career. And that is, what does it look like after we're gone? What is the field, if you like, look like after we've vacated it? In short, what has it been all about? What have we been doing, laboring? And what have we left behind? I realized just yesterday that a certain phrase from David's New Haven years, which his grad school years in the early 80s, was running seemingly randomly as so much solar dust through my head, and I've learned to pay attention to that over the years. And it was this phrase, "Why'd you do it, Dave?" which no one would get, but I know he would get it, and it involves, I think, a tow truck and some stuff in New Haven. Anyway, why'd you do it? So why do we all do what we do? I don't know that it's obvious to others or even to ourselves. So let's look. What do we, at the end of the day, as we say, what have we left behind? And I would say, if you look at the threshed wheat in the foreground, we've left behind our work, which is not unbeautiful. And insofar as you can envision the figure who once stood there, but is now gone, because, again, this is about what happens when we, like Homer's figure, have left the scene, but left something behind. I would say there's a way that the threshed wheat in the foreground, which is all spangled and lit up, is not just the remnants of the person, but is somehow their bodily substance, like transmuted or transubstantiated into this work, the result of their work. So one might say one leaves behind not only one's work, the kind of thing you could check out from a library or from a digital commons, etc., but also something of oneself is in one's work, that the veteran has kind of melted or fallen, but in such a way that we can feel his presence. And you look at this further, and if you look at the standing wheat, it makes me think of the nature of the art historian's task or the scholar's task, which is, I would define in two ways. One is it's endless. There's no end to it. And when it does end, for us, there's so many things undone or incompleted, etc. But I also think that there's just a taste, and again, nodding towards Jennifer's talk here, a taste of the infinite or the cosmic here. In what we do, if you can picture Homer's figure again, like he would somehow, with his back turned to us, owe something to, say, Friedrich's Traveler overlooking a sea of fog, something romantic, something like Emerson's Crossing a Bare Common, a figure who might have, as Emerson said in 1836, an original relation to the universe. I think, in short, the person who has left the field is someone whose legacy is that of confronting an endless work, a work for which there is no end. And yet also there's some kind of intimation of infinity or of something beyond our comprehension there too. I like, which is especially visible in this picture, that one little brightly lit tuft or top of wheat on the left, kind of like a blonde hair going to the right, that is just rising above the horizon there. And I think if you think, like, what has it been for, you could say that might be a point, some modest, gentle, what would be the word, transcendence of our bodily position, something that exceeds us, rises above us. I know, two anecdotes. One is from Michael Fried. I remember in 2013, I was giving a talk and I'm remembering something Martin Berger said about having dinner with Michael Fried at an Indian restaurant in London back in the day. And I think you said, Martin, that frequently Michael Fried would say something that was so interesting that the conversation would just come to a complete halt at the dinner table while Michael Fried proceeded to eat all the food on the table. And maybe that sets up what I'm about to say with love and respect for Michael Fried. But it's that someone asked him what his work would be for, like after he's gone. He said, my mother will hate me or would hate me for saying this, but it's to be immortal. And, so this is just this idea, there's something, it's not very democratic or even, it's certainly not humble to say, but it might be truthful to say that we seek to create something that outlives us and that rises above the common lot. There's another thing here, which is the foreground here, and you could say that what we leave behind is what is in our past is the foreground for a new person. That's what a scholar does. They leave things behind, and the pages become brittle, or however you want to characterize it, but they leave something behind that is then the foreground for another person, and that foreground is an opening or a clearing. It's not exactly a poetic clearing. I was thinking of Robert Frost's beautiful early poem called The Tuft of Flowers, which is about the mower who mows a whole field but leaves a tuft of flowers standing for the next person to find. This is a field completely mown, and yet it too is generous. And so, when I was chair of my department at Stanford, I tried to interest my colleagues in faculty meetings with an actual philosophical conversation, which had to do with what is it all for? What is our life's work? Do you have a life's work? And that didn't go over very well. But I've always thought of it as almost the only question, really. Like, what is this for? Does one have a life's work? And one could say it's to create this kind of spangled opening that was our background, and then it is now someone else's foreground. Famously, as any American art teacher knows, there's a pentamento in this work of the cradle scythe over on the left, so something that Homer thought he would portray and then chose not to. It's just midway up, 3 horizontal bands there, a different kind of scythe than the one the man actually holds in the painting. I don't know. I don't have a particular account for this, but we do leave a kind of ghostly presence of who we are and our things we think better of, that we repent of, are there as well as the legacy we leave behind. And it's part of the opening. And when I look at the figure now, I can even see him under the light of this account, this solitary figure who might be David Lubin in this case, as, what we do is we're proceeding to kind of cut ourselves out of the picture in doing our work. Yes, he's winnowing the wheat, but he's also somehow engaged in clearing himself out of the way so that we can see the world itself in its cultivation, in its earthliness. He's trying to, in his own way, 100 years to the year from Jennifer's picture, and a picture that is made in a year of Mars, that is the end of the American Civil War, 1865. he's like those Pasadena young men, not in pastel, but he's working on a correct rendering of the universe, you know. And to quote Louis Menand about a Civil War person, he's directing his path towards a light he cannot see, towards a star he cannot see. And I think that also is a beautiful indication of why we do what we do. Scholars, maybe American art scholars particularly, are so modest, so deprecating about what we do, but there is an exaltation to it which is quite humble, and I think David has pursued with great humility, designs that are vast, as Jennifer was saying. So, who is this? What is the nature of the being who is not here once the scholar has left the stage? And in this painting, which you all know, The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd by John Singer Sargent from 1882, is just fantastic painting for when he was made when he was 25, 26 years old. I would like to suggest that an independent spirit leaves the world, and when the scholar has left the field for us. And I just want to explore that a little bit. You see, of course, most of the painting, but not all of the painting, you see three of the four Boyd daughters. You see Julia there in the foreground. You see Florence leaning against one of the vases, and you see Jane looking out at us next to Florence. You don't see Mary Louisa, who's the saucy, insouciant girl of about 7 or 8 years old who occupies that left place. And I think I take her out of the picture, I guess, to help us think about the independent spirit who is left when the scholar departs. And what I mean by that is, I don't know, I'm just very taken by David's own description of this figure in active portrayal, which, by the way, is, I read that, as I've told David several times, at the end of my first semester of graduate school in the art and architecture library at Yale, and I was kind of saving it as a treat for myself. And it was a treat because I just felt like, wow, you can do this? I mean, this is incredible. And I think that did set me on my way, as Jennifer's saying too. And just looking at it again, the writing is so beautiful. The descriptions are so beautiful. It's really precocious in pretty startling ways. So I feel in that book, David devotes such a beautiful description to all four girls who he identifies by letters of the alphabet, but to Mary Louisa in particular. So you have J in the foreground, Julia, like the fishhook shape. You get a sort of general R for Florence against the vase, and then an I for Jane. But Mary Louisa is an A, and I was just thinking about that A that David gives her as part of this independence of spirit. And, A, first letter of the alphabet, connected with the word, for me, adventure, which has more than a connotation of just, I'm going to have an adventure as though it were a lark. Adventure suggests chance, destiny, fate. It seems like somehow some very serious things are given to that girl who's not here, who is set off ceremonially by Sargent, and whose presence I think you can still feel even without her being there. And I think the thing that governs my sense of she's the one I want to take out of the picture to talk today about is because I've always remembered that David likens her to Huck Finn, just offhand. And Erica Hirschler, in her fine book on this painting, likens all the girls to Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, which is also good. But I really like Huck Finn, adventure, and the idea of setting out which is so characteristic of David's work, into, not a cosmos, but the Mississippi River, which is its own kind of alterity. And, I think, again, we're quite demure, almost apologetic to a fault, sometimes about what we've accomplished, but I think we have to acknowledge that with each one of us, when we seed the field, et cetera, a certain adventure and a certain innocence goes out of the world. A plucky daring. Now, there are ways to leave the world or ways to announce one's absence. And, I thought of 3 here, which probably we've all experienced fantasies of at some time or another. But I would say, we can take our toys and go home is one, which is not what I feel about this picture. But I'm reminded of Thomas Aiken's famous saying, and no doubt heartfelt, but nonetheless, his saying that my honors are persecution and neglect, enhanced because unsought. And, sense of like, I'm out of here, like, I'm too, my feelings are hurt, and I'm going to leave. A second one might be just reminded of another figure from active portrayal, Henry James, and Henry James describing in his autobiography at the end of his life, A Small Boy and Others, he talks about his memories of hanging out with his cousin Marie in Albany in the summer of '54, as in 1854. And it's where the young Henry James, then only about 10, was watching his uncle tell Marie, I think it's time for bed, and Marie was having none of it. And then the uncle uttered words that were very faithful to the young Henry James. He said, "Come now, Marie, let's not make a scene." And Henry James is like, make a scene, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing. But what I like about this is that there's no scene that's being made. She's just vanishing, or she's disappearing. She's gone without ceremony, without to-do. And I think that does lead me to my sense here of how the scholar leaves the stage as an independent spirit, as an A, as an Isabel Archer, as a American Adam, as an innocent, because David, you're an innocent, Yeah, I was looking right at you, baby, because we've talked about a lot of not innocent things, but I would say that is part of the innocence. I think there's a joyousness to you, and you're writing about this person in this painting is kind of autobiographical, I would say. We just leave, and when we leave, I think our absence is a presence. I feel like the way the wall is painted there indicates her, though she's not there. I think the design of the parquet floor indicates her, and maybe a little bit more philosophically somber, I think of the mirror in the distance as connecting her to her too. That is, there's a reflection of light in a mirror in the background. The mirror is above a mantle. And I would just say this, that what that mirror designates. It designates Las Meninas, which is the source of this painting, and it designates even not just the mirror in that painting on the back wall, but also the man at the doorway there, who is not there. And though you could connect that mirror with the two girls, Florence and Jane, absolutely, who are poised, as David so beautifully says, on the edge of adolescence at age 14 and 12, respectively, I think that also goes with our figure who is not there, and that she too is a threshold figure, like the man in the doorway in Las Meninas, some figure of the edge of wisdom, a different kind of wisdom maybe even than that of her older sisters. I'm really not how to say it. I don't really know how to say it, but you could think of that mirror as almost in a Walter Paterian sense as auguring the relapse after death into the formlessness that preceded birth. Some sage wisdom that's contained in her. So Julia died in 1969, Florence against the vase in 1919, Jane in 1955, Mary Louisa in 1945. It's just such a mysterious thing, you know, to be forever young and to be in a way not there either. But figures of the threshold, Mary Louisa and the thresher in Homer's picture, I see as related. And with this one, you know, I realized that, and these are just the three paintings that popped into my head. You might say, why these three? I don't know, they just popped into my head, and that's what, just go with that. But there is actually a rhyme and reason which relates to what I'm about to say here, which is that these, to me, are all three paintings of the 1980s. They're not literally from the 1980s, of course, but they just have that savor of American art history then. So George Caleb Bingham's Jolly Flatboatman from 1846, you know, just that kind of heyday of which in this very room there are a few representatives, but certainly David Lubin and I are sort of products of the 1980s. And it really, what I'm about to say then relates, if you like, to something so dry sounding as scholarly method, but finally also to these questions of absence and presence. So, you know, in this picture, you know, the figure missing is the dancer at the top, the man who's doing the jig, everyone's playing the music for. And you might say he's been deconstructed, and that is the method that David and I learned, as many people did at Yale, or were sort of learned as it unlearned us or discombobulated our notions. And it is interesting, speaking of now of the kind of temperament of what we do and the temperament of what we leave behind. Is it generous or is it not generous? That deconstruction as a rite of passage and a through line and a system, you know, it turns everything guilty and a little, it obviously installs suspicion as the foremost art of the scholar. So in this case, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but when I look at this, I feel that the dancer at the top is gone, and everyone knows where his body is. It sort of reminds me of the description of a Hitchcock movie or a Hitchcock scene. Hitchcock, he wanted to make this, I don't think he ever did, where two people are discussing something in an automobile assembly plant, and a car is being made, put together piece by piece right behind them, and at the end of the scene, a body is discovered in the car. It just feels like somehow these are in the critical terminology that we used back in the day. These people are complicit in something. They know where the body is, where the body is hidden. In short, you know, what we learned is how to treat works for what is not there in order to be suspicious of them. And that can have a lot of merit. And you might say in this case that, you know, the guy up there is, you know, very clearly, I think you'd have to say a figure of transcendence, because if you want to Google this after the talk, you will see, if you haven't seen already, that he comes straight out of, it's a figure of Jesus in Raphael's Transfiguration, which Bingham would have known from prints, and it's just what it is. It's, And so one way to understand this is the very method of this class says, or this talk says that the scholar's legacy is to somehow conspire with the critical practice of removing transcendence from life. You know, as though that should be it. And transcendence, how to write that? How about just transfiguration, like to be changed in the Rilkean sense of you must change your life? It would seem that most scholarship now is devoted to pointing out the false consciousness of that aspiration. But what I want to say last is I'm not really sure that is the spirit in which I retract that figure. After all, Bingham's quotation, you could say, of Raphael is kind of cheap and kind of a little bit Disneyfying in the sense that it makes very light of something serious or supernatural. It turns it into a jig or a dance. And, you know, it's not far to think of from there to think of a certain kind of anything goes visual culture of capitalism that just vampirically appropriates things for its own gratifications, etc. So maybe removing the figure is not so deconstructive after all. Maybe there's something actually kind of beautiful that happens when, I don't know, when the scholar comes from Mars, when the scholar does something that takes something away or makes it impossible for you to see it in the same way. And for me, what that is, not to make a secret of it here, is it opens up the sky. Almost as though, like Homer's figure is, in a way, like threshing to make the sky, that band of blue above him, to summon the blue. So I feel like removing the dancer here opens up the sky and makes these guys actually into somewhat of a pleasant band of minstrels, if you like, who are playing the tune of that nice, hazy, humid Missouri sky, as though what we're always trying to do is to go from the here and now to something larger or beyond ourselves with our own humble music. And, deconstruction in that sense is not the term I would use. So it's interesting because it just allows me, at least, and maybe also all of us, to reflect on the time period of David's career from the 1980s to now, and just what that has entailed, we might say in terms of method, but I would say much more in terms of what kind of generosity of spirit is at play in it. And I would say encompassing all of the work has been a certain kind of playful music that tries to portray something beyond its own tune, but that can only be made visible, kind of like the Pasadena Scientists, by virtue of their own sort of scandalously sensuous, ad hoc, if you like, descriptions that give us much to reflect on, and long after the person who created them is gone. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.